there is a sound, the sound of a key turning in a lock, the final solid click as the door closes, shutting out the world. And in that moment, for the first time all day, you exhale. It is a breath you did not even realize you had been holding. A profound, almost physical decompression. The static noise of the outside world fades, and you are left, finally, in the sacred healing quiet of your own sanctuary. This feeling of being alone is not emptiness. It is not loneliness. It is relief. It is the feeling of a soldier after a long and grueling battle, finally being allowed to take off the heavy, suffocating armor. Because out there, in the world, interacting with other people, it feels so often like a performance, a constant, low-level, deeply exhausting job. You are the observer, standing just behind your own eyes, watching your mouth form the correct smiles. You hear your own voice laugh at the right moment, a sound that feels like it is coming from a small distance away. You are the actor and the director, the performer and the critic, all at once, trapped in the same body. You are a deep thinker in a world that seems to demand shallow answers. And so you must constantly translate, edit, and curate yourself just to be understood. To be social is to be at work. To be alone is to be at rest. We have, as a culture, created a polite and simple label for this experience. We call it introversion. We tell ourselves, I am just an introvert. I recharge my batteries by being alone. And this is true, but it is also perhaps the most profound understatement of our lives. It is a clean, simple, socially acceptable label for a feeling that is infinitely more complex and more painful than that. In a world that feels increasingly loud, artificial, and demanding, this retreat into solitude does not just feel like a preference. It feels like an act of survival. It feels like an act of profound wisdom. Why would you choose to engage in the psychological torture of social performance, of small talk, of pretending, when you could be in your own sanctuary, with your own thoughts, with the truth? You are not antisocial. You are perhaps anti-artificial. Your solitude is not a weakness. It is a sign of your integrity, your refusal to participate in a world of lies. This is a powerful and comforting story. It is the story of the lone wolf, the outsider, the awakened mind that has seen too much to ever truly fit in again. It is a beautiful story, and it is perhaps the final and most sophisticated layer of our own armor. But what if this story, as true as it may feel, is also a brilliant justification? A beautiful philosophical defense mechanism built to protect us from a much older, much simpler, and much more painful truth. What if this profound preference for being alone is not a preference at all? What if it is not a choice, but a compulsion? What if it is not a sign of your spiritual awakening, but the scar tissue of a deep and unhealed wound? This is the great unspoken paradox of the person who feels better alone. And it is the question that can lead us to the very blueprint of our own inner prison. What if the peace you feel in solitude is not true, expansive peace, but simply the absence of a threat? What if the click of that lock is not the sound of you entering your sanctuary, but the sound of the fortress gates being sealed against a world you were taught to see as a battlefield? What if your nervous system, a long, long time ago, was taught a single devastating and unspoken lesson? That the price of connection is pain, and that the only true safety is to be alone. To understand this, we must begin with a foundational truth. No human being is born with a need for solitude. We are born in a state of absolute and terrifying dependence. Our very survival, not just for days or months, but for years, is predicated on our ability to connect, to attach, to be seen, and to be cared for. Connection is not a luxury for us. It is a biological imperative as essential as oxygen or water. A human infant left alone will perish. Our nervous system is designed from its very first spark to seek connection. So if we are biologically hardwired for connection, how does a human mind become rewired to prefer isolation? How does our most fundamental survival instinct get inverted to the point where the thing we need most, connection, becomes the thing we perceive as the greatest threat? This does not happen by accident. A fortress is not built in a time of peace. A mind does not learn to prefer solitude unless it has learned, through brutal and repeated experience, that connection is a synonym for pain. The unspoken trauma is not a single event. It is the slow, methodical education of a young, open heart teaching it, day by day, that people are not safe. It is the architectural blueprint of a wound. The first blueprint is the trauma of performance. This is the child who was not hated or abused, but who was loved conditionally. This is the star kid, the good child, the obedient child, the one who got praised for achievements, the one who learned very early a devastating equation. I am loved because I perform, because I get good grades, because I am quiet, because I am athletically gifted, because I am the mature one who never causes trouble, because I make my parents look good, because I do not have needs that inconvenience anyone. Their connection was not given freely. It was earned, and what is earned can be taken away. This child learned that love is not a birthright. It is a salary, and the moment you stop performing, the payment stops. You can see it in the small moments. The child brings home a test with a 95, and instead of a celebration, there is the question, what happened to the other 5 points? The child wins second place, and instead of pride, there is the subtle disappointment that it was not first. The child expresses a feeling, a need, a preference that does not fit the family narrative, and the room goes cold. Nothing is ever said directly. That is the cruelty of it. There is no explicit rejection, just a change in temperature. A withdrawal of warmth so subtle that the child cannot point to it, cannot name it, cannot prove it happened. But the body knows. The nervous system knows. It logs every micro rejection and builds a map of what is safe and what is not. And so the child learns to edit, to curate, to perform. Their sense of self became fused with their persona, with the mask, with the performance. They do not know who they are underneath the role because they were never safe enough to find out. Every time they tried to show something real, something imperfect, something that was not part of the act, they felt the temperature in the room change. The subtle withdrawal of approval, the micro rejection. So they learned to keep the mask on, always. The tragedy is that they became excellent at it. So excellent that everyone believes the performance is real. So excellent that they sometimes forget it is a performance themselves. They have been the good one, the responsible one, the one who has it together for so long that they cannot remember being anything else. But the body remembers, the exhaustion remembers, the dread before every social interaction remembers. For this person, socializing is not a joy. It is the continuation of the performance. It is work, the exhausting, high-stakes act of being the charming guest, the witty friend, the supportive partner, the person everyone thinks they know, but no one has ever actually met. They are trapped in the prison of their own competence, The dread they feel before a social event is the exhaustion of an actor about to go on stage for a role they are tired of playing, a role they never auditioned for, a role they were cast in by parents who needed them to be something, and they have been playing it ever since. The profound relief they feel when they are finally alone is the relief of being off stage. Solitude is the only place they can take off the heavy mask, the only place they are not being judged, graded, or applauded, the only place where no one is watching, expecting, needing them to be anything other than what they are. Their preference for being alone is not a preference at all. It is the bone-deep weariness of a performer who is never allowed to rest. The second blueprint is the trauma of betrayal. This is the child of chaos. This is the child who grew up in a world of criticism, volatility, or unpredictability. The scapegoat, the one who could never do anything right, the one who walked on eggshells, scanning constantly for signs of danger. They learned that the people who were supposed to be their safe harbor were in fact the storm. They learned that connection was a gamble, that vulnerability was an invitation for attack, that love was often entangled with anger, judgment, ridicule, or sudden, inexplicable withdrawal. One day, affection. The next day, rage. No pattern, no logic, just chaos wearing the face of a parent. The dinner table was a minefield. A wrong word, a wrong look, a wrong tone of voice, and the explosion would come. Or worse, the cold silence that lasted days. The child never knew which parent would walk through the door. The loving one or the terrifying one. They looked the same. They sounded the same. Until they didn't. This child learned to read the room before they learned to read books. They learned to detect the microscopic shifts in facial expression, the subtle changes in breathing, the almost imperceptible tension in a voice. They became experts in the language of threat, fluent in a dialect most people do not even know exists. They did not learn this because they were curious about human psychology. They learned it because their survival depended on it. Missing a signal could mean hours of screaming. Misreading a mood could mean becoming the target. Their hypervigilance was not a personality trait. It was a survival adaptation. This child's mind, in an act of brilliant self-preservation, became a fortress. It developed a hypervigilant radar, the deep thinker we spoke of, scanning for the subtle shifts in mood, the microscopic changes in tone, the signs of impending danger. They became experts at reading rooms, not because they were curious about people, but because their survival depended on predicting when the next explosion would come. They learned that the only way to be safe is to be invisible, to be small, to need nothing, to expect nothing, to build walls so high that no one can ever get close enough to hurt them again. And they learned something else. They learned not to trust their own perception of love, because the person who hurt them also said they loved them. The hand that struck also held. The voice that screamed also soothed. Love became entangled with pain, in a knot they have never been able to untie. So when someone now offers them love, they cannot receive it cleanly. There is always the waiting, the watching, the scanning for the moment when the mask will slip and the real person, the dangerous person, will emerge. As an adult, this translates into a life of profound and guarded isolation. They are the one who keeps everyone at arm's length, the one who has many acquaintances but no real friends, the one who disappears when things get too close, too real, too intimate, the one who sabotages relationships right when they start to get good, because good is when you let your guard down, And letting your guard down is when you get hurt. They feel better alone because in their nervous system, alone is the only synonym for safe. The peace they feel in solitude is the peace of the soldier who has finally left the active war zone. It is the silence that follows an explosion. It is not the presence of something good. It is the absence of something terrible. Their preference for being alone is not a preference. It is a permanent state of strategic retreat. The third blueprint is the most subtle and perhaps most painful of all. This is the trauma of invisibility. This is the child who was not criticized or forced to perform. They were simply not seen. They were met with a void. They would reach out for connection and be met with the distracted gaze of a parent lost in their own problems, their own depression, their own narcissism, their own exhaustion. They would speak and no one would hear. They would cry and no one would come. They would achieve something and no one would notice. They would fail and no one would notice that either. They were not abused. That is what makes it so hard to name. There was no villain, just an absence. A parent who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere. A home that had food and shelter but no warmth. A childhood that looks fine from the outside but felt on the inside like shouting into a void. This child learned a lesson that is in many ways worse than the lesson of betrayal. They learned that connection is not dangerous. It is an illusion. It is a phantom, a mirage, something other people seem to have, but that somehow, for reasons they cannot understand, is not available to them. They watched other children with their parents and saw something they did not have. They saw attention, engagement, response. They saw that when those children spoke, someone listened. When they cried, someone came. When they existed, someone noticed. And they wondered what was wrong with them, what they were missing, what they were doing wrong that made them so easy to overlook. They learned that their authentic self, their cry for help, their joy, their pain, makes no impact on the world. It does not even register. They learned the deepest, coldest of all human fears. I do not matter. The pain of this is unbearable. It is the pain of a ghost, of someone who is present but not seen, alive but not acknowledged. It is a kind of death while still breathing. It is the experience of existing in a world that does not confirm your existence. So the child's mind, to protect itself, performs a kind of psychological preemptive strike. It teaches itself not to hope. It learns that the desire for connection is the true source of the pain. Not the absence of connection, but the wanting of it. The disappointment is too much to bear. The reaching out and being met with nothing over and over is too much to survive. So it stops reaching. It numbs the longing. It builds a fortress, not of high walls, but of emotional anesthesia. It decides, somewhere deep below the level of conscious thought, that it is better to want nothing than to want and be denied. Better to need no one than to need and be ignored. It learns to love staying at home, to have no friends, to need no one, because it has concluded, based on overwhelming evidence, that the hope for connection is a fool's game that always leads to pain. And here is the cruelest part. This child often grows up to be very self-sufficient, very independent, very capable of being alone, and the world praises them for it. You are so strong. You do not need anyone. You are so self-contained. And they smile, and they agree, and inside something is screaming, because they did not choose this strength. It was forced upon them. They did not want to need no one. They learned to need no one because needing was too painful. Their independence is not a virtue. It is a scar. Their preference for being alone is not a preference. It is a profound, tragic, and intelligent surrender. It is a life built upon the scar tissue of that original, echoing silence. These are the blueprints: performance, betrayal, invisibility, the armor of the star, the scapegoat, and the ghost. Most of us are a complex combination of all three. Layers of scar tissue built up over years, each wound adding another brick to the fortress. But the result is the same. We are left with a mind that has concluded, based on overwhelming evidence, that solitude is superior to connection, that people are, at best, exhausting, and at worst, dangerous, that the only true safety is to be alone. Our preference for being alone is not a sign of our strength. It is the shape of our wound. We are not loners by nature. We are refugees. We have retreated into the high, lonely tower of our own minds, because it is the only place we have ever felt truly safe. But what happens inside this fortress? What is the experience of living in permanent, guarded isolation? The mind does not simply go to sleep. A consciousness cut off from the world of authentic, messy human connection does not stop working. It turns its vast, powerful energy inward. This is the birth of the deep thinker. This is the birth of the observer. When the world outside is too painful, too chaotic, or too empty to engage with, the child's consciousness performs a brilliant act of self-preservation. It retreats. It pulls back from the front lines of experience, from the vulnerable territory of the body and the heart, and takes up a protected position in the control room of the intellect. It becomes a spectator, watching its own life unfold from a safe, dissociative distance. You are not in the argument with your family. You are watching the argument, analyzing it, cataloging the injustices. You are not in the rejection. You are floating above it, studying it like a scientist. This is not a spiritual practice. It is a trauma response. It is the mind learning to leave the body to avoid a pain it cannot otherwise endure. And what does this observer do, alone in its high tower, day after day, year after year? It thinks. It thinks to understand the trauma it has fled. It thinks to predict the future, to ensure the trauma never happens again. It thinks because, in the barren landscape of its isolation, its thoughts are its only companions. This is the overthinking mind. This is the anxious rumination. This is the endless analysis that never leads to peace. It is not a sign of a superior intellect. It is the sound of a mind that has been locked in a fortress, pacing the same corridors, replaying the same battles, checking the same defenses over and over again, in an endless looping state of hypervigilance. The deep thinker is a sentry left over from an old war, who can never be convinced that the war is over. And here we must confront the most subtle and profound aspect of this fortress. The mystical traditions, the very philosophy that draws us, speak of the profound, liberating truth of non-duality, the strange freedom of being no one. They speak of the self as an illusion, of ego death, of transcendence, of the bliss of dissolving into something larger than the individual. And you, the loner, the observer, you hear this and it resonates with a terrifying, beautiful clarity, because you have felt this. You know what it is to be no one. You know what it is to be a disembodied observer, a pure awareness, watching the performance of your own false self. You know what it is to feel disconnected from the drama of human life, floating above it, untouched by it. You feel, in your isolation, that you have touched a profound spiritual truth, that your detachment is not a wound, but a gift, that your inability to connect is actually an advanced ability to see through the illusion of connection. You read the texts about non-attachment and think, I am already there. You hear the teachings about transcending the ego and think, I have never had a solid ego to begin with. You encounter the idea that the self is an illusion and think, I have known this my whole life. And it feels like validation. Finally, a framework that makes your isolation sacred. Finally, a philosophy that turns your wound into a virtue. And here we must ask the most courageous and important question of all. Is this freedom you feel in your solitude a true spiritual transcendence? Or is it a psychological dissociation? Are you no one because you have bravely chosen to transcend the ego? Or are you no one because you were forced to become a nobody in order to survive? Are you the wise sage who has willingly let go of the self? Or are you the ignored child who never had the chance to build a self at all? Are you detached because you have seen through the illusion of attachment? Or are you detached because attachment was never safe and your nervous system learned to avoid it? This is the great spiritual bypass of the wounded intellectual. It is the act of using profound mystical concepts to justify and maintain the walls of our own fortress. It is the final, brilliant defense of the traumatized mind. It is the act of relabeling our greatest wound as our greatest virtue. And it is so seductive because it is partly true. There is something real in the observation that the social world is full of performance and illusion. There is something valid in the perception that most human interaction is shallow. There is something accurate in the feeling that you see things others do not see. The problem is not that these perceptions are wrong. The problem is that they are being used to avoid something. We tell ourselves we are awake when in fact we are still hiding. We tell ourselves we are free from the illusions of society, when in fact we are prisoners of our own past. We tell ourselves we have transcended the need for connection, when in fact we have suppressed it so deeply that we can no longer feel it. The peace you feel in your fortress of solitude is real, but it is the cold, thin peace of an empty room, not the warm, chaotic, and vibrant peace of a full life. It is the peace of absence, not the peace of presence. The mystic who has truly transcended the ego can move freely in the world, can love without grasping, can connect without losing themselves, can be alone without needing to be alone, can be with others without losing their center. The traumatized person who has mistaken dissociation for enlightenment cannot. They need the fortress. They need the walls. They need the isolation, because without it, the old terror returns. The anxiety, the exhaustion, the feeling of being unsafe. The difference is not what they feel inside the solitude. The difference is whether they can leave. And there is a cost to this fortress that we rarely speak of. The walls that keep the danger out also keep everything else out. The years pass, the fortress holds, and slowly, quietly, you begin to notice what you have lost. You have lost the mess of real intimacy, the experience of being truly known by another person, not the curated version, not the performance, but the real, flawed, contradictory you. You have protected yourself from rejection by never allowing anyone close enough to reject the real you. But you have also protected yourself from acceptance. You do not know what it feels like to be loved for who you actually are, because you have never let anyone see it. You have convinced yourself that if they knew the real you, they would leave. And so you never let them know. And so they never leave. But they also never stay. Not really. They stay with the performance. They stay with the mask. And you are left, even in the midst of relationships, utterly alone. You have lost the experience of being changed by another person, of having your ideas challenged, your assumptions questioned, your blind spots revealed. In your fortress, you are safe from criticism, but you are also safe from growth. You have been having the same thoughts, running the same loops for years, decades. Your inner world has become an echo chamber of one. You think you are a deep thinker, and maybe you are, but a mind that only talks to itself eventually starts to repeat itself. Without the friction of another consciousness, your thoughts become grooves, then ruts, then trenches. You mistake familiarity for depth. You mistake repetition for insight. You have lost the texture of shared experience, the inside jokes, the wordless understanding, the shorthand that develops between people who have weathered things together. Your memories are yours alone. There is no one to say, remember when. There is no one who carries a piece of your history. When something happens to you, good or bad, there is no one to tell. No one who would understand why it matters. No one who knows the context, the backstory, the significance. You process everything alone. Every joy is a private joy. Every grief is a private grief. And private joys are dimmer, and private griefs are heavier than the ones that are shared. You have lost the particular joy of being needed, of mattering to someone in a daily, ordinary way, not as a performer, not as a helper, just as a presence, someone who is missed when they are gone, someone whose absence leaves a hole. You tell yourself you do not need to be needed, that this is another form of freedom. But there is something in the human heart that wants to matter to someone, wants to be the person they call when something happens, wants to be woven into someone else's life so tightly that removing you would leave a tear. You have protected yourself from that. And in doing so, you have protected yourself from mattering. You have lost time. The years inside the fortress are quiet, but they are also empty. And one day, you look up and realize that the walls you built to protect yourself have become the walls of a prison you cannot escape. The solitude that once felt like relief now feels like a life sentence. You are 40, or 50, or 60, and you realize that the life you were protecting yourself to live, you never actually lived. You were so busy defending the fortress that you forgot what the fortress was supposed to protect. And the worst part is, you built it yourself, brick by brick, and you are the only one with the key. There is a phrase that appears in the mystical literature. You must be somebody before you can be nobody. It sounds like a riddle, but it contains the key to everything we have been discussing. The dissolution of the self that the mystics describe, the ego death, the transcendence. It is not the absence of a self. It is the release of a self that has been fully formed. It is the letting go that can only happen when there is something solid to let go of. But you cannot release what you never had. The ignored child is already no one. The performer is already a mask with nothing behind it. The scapegoat is already invisible, already erased. For them, becoming nobody is not transcendence. It is just more of the same wound. It is the continuation of a disappearance that began in childhood. Before you can let go of the self, you have to have a self to let go of. Before you can choose solitude, you have to have the genuine option of connection. Before your aloneness can be freedom, it has to stop being a necessity. And so we arrive at the place where the philosophy ends and the living begins. Not with a protocol, not with steps, not with a program for optimization, with a recognition. If you have made it this far, if these words have landed somewhere inside you, then you have already begun the only work that matters, the work of seeing. The fortress does not fall because you attack it. It does not fall because you criticize yourself for having built it. It does not fall because you read the right book, or watch the right video, or find the right technique. The fortress begins to crack when you see it clearly. When you stop calling it a sanctuary and recognize it as a bunker. When you stop calling it introversion and recognize it as a wound. When you stop telling yourself that you prefer to be alone and admit that you are afraid to be anything else. This seeing is not a solution. It is a beginning. And from this beginning, something strange can happen. The walls do not have to come down all at once. The bridge back to the world does not have to be built in a day. It can be one moment of honesty with one person, one time when you do not perform, one conversation where you say something real and see what happens. Not to fix yourself, not to become an extrovert, not to be normal, just to find out if the danger is still real, to find out if the lessons your nervous system learned in childhood still apply, to find out if connection, real connection, still equals pain, or if that was true once with those people in that house at that age, but is not necessarily true now, here, with different people in a different life. You do not owe the world your presence. You do not have to justify your solitude. You do not have to become someone you are not. But you might want to know if the walls are protecting you from a real threat or from a memory of a threat. You might want to know if you are choosing the fortress or if the fortress is choosing you. The question is not how to escape the solitude. The question is whether the solitude is a home or a hiding place. There are people who are genuinely nourished by their own company, who have rich inner lives that do not require external validation, who connect deeply with a few and feel no need for more, who have examined their solitude and found it to be a choice, not a compulsion. And there are people for whom the solitude is a cage disguised as a palace, who tell themselves they prefer to be alone because the alternative is too frightening to consider, who have built an identity out of their isolation because the identity of the isolated one is less painful than the identity of the unwanted one. The difference is not visible from the outside. The difference is only known from within, and only you know which one you are. The trauma of feeling better alone is not a flaw to be fixed. It is a story to be understood. It is the story of a child who learned, through no fault of their own, that the world was not safe, who built, in response, the only structure they could, who survived, who is still surviving. The fortress was not a mistake. It was an act of genius, an act of self-preservation. It kept you alive. It kept you sane. It gave you a place to be when there was no place for you in the world. You do not have to tear it down, but you might, one day, want to open a window to see if the war that required these walls is still being fought, to see if the world outside is still the one you remember, to see if you, the person you have become inside this fortress, might be able to survive out there after all, not because you should, not because you are broken, but because you are curious, Because something in you, despite everything, despite all the evidence, despite all the pain, still wants to know what it would feel like to be met. Not the performance, not the mask, not the curated version. You. The click of the lock can be two things. It can be the sound of the fortress sealing shut, the walls holding, the refugee safe for another night. Or it can be the sound of a door that opens both ways. The sanctuary remains. The solitude remains. The quiet healing space of your own company remains. But it is no longer a prison. It is a room in a larger house. A house with doors that open to the outside. A house you can leave and return to and leave again. Because you are no longer hiding. You are resting. And there is a difference. There is all the difference in the world.